talk up today's session on social media by tagging the gnome. We also have our speakers, Devlin Peck, so you can tag him, and Paul Schneider, you can tag him, or Torrance Learning, which was Leanne G, and you can tag them, her, if you have any comments or questions from today's session that maybe isn't reached, or you want to share some of the content you learned. Just a reminder, this web session is recorded and sent out to the entire cohort to review. Jamie, thanks for those hashtags. So those are some great hashtags to use on social. Right now, the xAPI cohort has 527 folks registered. Today, we're going to talk about, at the end, project briefs and tips for getting team traction, and we'll look at what teams already exist. And we're going to talk about how to send data from e-learning tools. So Paul Schneider is here to share about that, and Devlin, and then Leanne. Behind the scenes today, you have myself, Jessica Jackson. I'm the xAPI cohort host. Hello. We also have Aaron and Jamie, so you'll see them really involved in the chat when you have tech issues or questions that you need to ask. And they also can help you navigate this platform and support with anything that you need there. Each week, we want to see a lot of engagement and conversation on Twitter. The gnome is kind of the face of the cohort. It is the voice of the cohort. The gnome posts the weekly web session recordings, shares out cohort updates and reminders, and shares out general xAPI events and news that are happening in our community. I would love if you engage with the gnome today and share one thing you've learned about xAPI during today's session, and we'll retweet that and get that out for other folks to see and to amplify your teams. For those of you whose first session is today, I'm going to do a brief overview of what the cohort is and how it works. So the xAPI Learning Cohort is a free, virtual, vendor-neutral 12-week learning by doing project-based team learning experience and community. And that's a lot of words, but they all mean something really important. So it is a free learning experience that's really important and core to the work that we're doing here, not only to increase xAPI adoption, but to ensure that anyone who needs access to education and learning and professional development has that access. That is an equity standard, something that we consider in ed tech and something that we continue to uphold. It's virtual, which means that when the pandemic hit, we didn't have to reschedule, shift, or anything because we were already facilitating our sessions online. It's vendor neutral, meaning that while we are supported and maintained by vendors who offer free access to their resources, such as Kaltura, such as Domino, Devlin, we give you resources so that you can learn, but we're not trying to sell those resources to you. We really try to maintain a vendor neutral approach, though we are grateful for our vendors that support the learning experience. It's 12 weeks, and we are in the first third of those 12 weeks, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. And it's really learning by doing. So we want to see you working with your project teams and learning as you build, break things, try things. And the key part is that we are a community. So in our Slack channel, which is a core component of where cohort is taking place, you'll have access to over 3,400 people in the xAPI community, both from a lens of having less experience and also those who worked on the spec themselves. So how does cohort work? It happens every week in our weekly web sessions right here in our Kaltura live room. And then these sessions are recorded and shared freely, both on our Twitter and through our weekly updates. And then it's also happening in that learning by doing project teams. So those project teams are meeting, convening, communicating in Slack and on GitHub where folks are working together. Again, we send a weekly email with updates and our web session recordings. So I told you that we have kind of cohort broke into thirds, and we are in the first third, right? Which is we're getting to know each other, getting to know the possibility with xAPI. We're forming, we're storming, we're norming in our teams. And then when we get to about a month in or 4 weeks in, we start digging into details and really start planning out our projects, iterating, trying, breaking things. And then as we get to the last third of the cohort, it's really about applying the application and thinking about what's in it for you. you, right? So that's where you might be doing demonstrations, you might be participating in the cohort demos, or at the xAPI party or in other conferences to share out what you learn. This semester, we have a lot of great sessions and voices that are going to be speaking. So this week we have Paul, Devlin, and Leanne. Thank you all for being here to talk about how to send data from e-learning tools. Thank you for supporting Cohort. Next week we'll have Matt Cleaver talk about how to send data from something that's not e-learning. And then we'll get into more of the nitty-gritty behind the scenes, like what's a learning record store, what is our learning ecosystem, what are statements, states, and profiles, what is learning analytics, and how do they work at IEEE, and what does a dashboard and visualization look like? And then we'll get into case studies where you'll see real life examples of how folks are using xAPI in their work. And then we'll get into project team demos, which is a great opportunity for you to share your work out loud, right? I think that there are often teams who don't feel ready to present by the time we get to April, but demos don't need to be perfect. They're just an opportunity to share out what you're learning and build on what you're learning. I think it's really exciting when teams present half-finished or half-baked ideas and get feedback on that from the community and then keep going. With that, I'm going to hand over the conversation to Paul, who's going to share some how-to to send data from e-learning tools. Thanks so much for being here, Paul.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. And let me just find that share button again. There we go, tools. Thank you. And everyone should be seeing my screen now. Excellent. Well, hey, thanks everyone for being here, and big thanks to Torrance Learning and putting on this cohort. I've participated a number of different times, and it's just awesome to see what everyone is doing and sharing. I mean, if you haven't figured out, this is a fantastic learning experience, a great way to kickstart your journey into xAPI. And I love just sharing, hey, any idea or thing, even if it's half-baked, go ahead and present it. Seen lots of folks who have taken something they did and then improved upon it in the next cohort. So it's a great way to do that. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about getting xAPI content from authoring tools into your LRS and just talk about the basics. So you want to get started, what do you need? And we're going to talk about how you connect to an LRS, talking about authoring tools kind of out of the box. How are they helping you or not? Fortunately, if they're not helping you, there are some other ways to get content into. And Devlin and Leanne are going to talk about some of that too. We'll talk about connecting to the LRS, and then I'll just show you a couple examples to hopefully get the juices flowing there, as well as some links to resources. And of course, I'll make this available so Jess and the team can go ahead and share this. Really, when we look at it, there are core pieces in there is you have your authoring tool. And of course, we'll learn next week, it's not always an authoring tool. There could be other things could spit and push information directly into your system. In many cases, you need to have that content hosted somewhere. In the past, you might have been involved in loading SCORM content. Almost always that SCORM content is in the LMS. And the LMS tracks it. With the xAPI, that's not always the case. Your learning record store may or may not have an option to host that content. So that's not always like an authoring tool directly into the LRS. It may be indirectly through another hosted environment that you provide, or in some cases, maybe hosted on your LMS, but sending records off to the learning record store. So keep that in mind. That is something a little bit different than what most people are used to. So you're then say, well, how do I connect a course in an LRS? And there's really a couple different ways to do it. As I mentioned, in some cases, you can load it directly into an LRS, or there are some LMSs out there that have an LRS built right into it. And then you can load it as you would a SCORM package. So it's very similar, except you would publish it as an xAPI package. But in other cases, and you may have that hosted somewhere else, or even though you can load the LMS, you may want to send learning record store data off to somewhere else. And that's where something called the LRS endpoint, learning record store endpoint, is. All LRSs, at least if they follow conformance, I've found some that aren't quite following it there, are going to have an LRS endpoint. and it's going to have a key and a secret or an ID and an endpoint there. You're going to take that information, and then that gets put into your package. Some tools will allow you to, like this is just a screenshot from Domino there, just to pop that information right into it. And you can go ahead and just pick it from a list and put it in there. Other ones may require to, after you publish the package, to manually put it in there. But there's going to be some way you can put that endpoint into it. And of course, in other cases, in the first instance, you don't necessarily have to use an endpoint. But one of those two ways is how you're going to get the data from your authoring system into the LRS. So there are multiple ways that you can send those xAPI statements. Of course, one of the ways is to hand code it. And some of the coders out there will point out it's super easy and throw those things out there. And I'm not going to say it's the most difficult programming, but anytime you have to program, there's an extra lift. So fortunately, authoring tools can do the heavy lifting for you and really help you out there. And even fortunately more so, there are other folks that have developed some other third-party tools that you can tie into it when the authoring tool is kind of lifting it to the first step, but not doing much more for you. So there are options. One of the previous cohorts that I participated in with several folks, we put together a study, and we actually did it over 2 cohorts, and then released an article, and then some other folks picked it up and then released an update. And basically, we looked at all the different authoring tools out there to try to give you some idea of what you can expect out of the box without having to do a whole lot extra. To be clear, the last time this was updated was in 2019, so not too long ago, spring of 2019. I think there might have been a few minor changes here, but for the most part, this is pretty accurate there. Out of the box, all the authoring tools are going to send you the same data that SCORM does, except via xAPI language, which is nice. At least it's in the right language, but there's nothing new there. All of them are also going to let you know that when you accessed an individual page, that you clicked on it or experienced that page, if you will. So those are kind of the, there's nothing unique there. All the major tools that we looked at are providing that out of the box there. As we start to look at other things, you're going to find that, not a lot of them provide additional information. So there are some tools like Domino that provides practice questions and audio and video and custom fields and other things out of the box. Other tools like Smart Builder also have some out of the box items like your custom fields and player navigation. You just turn that on. And then some of them also have unique things too. If you have Rise and put the story block in the storyline block in there, you'll at least know that it was accessed there. Domino has some built-in information with video playlists, scenario and branching, and you just use it, and then you're going to get statements out of it. And then other ones too are going to provide information about metadata. At the course level, they're going to provide, hey, what project it was or what course it is. Domino does provide some information because it does have additional structure levels of module pre and post test and things like that. As you look into other ones, some of the other key things are, hey, yeah, out of the box stuff is great, but I'm unique. I need to send some unique things there. And in some tools like Domino, Lectora, Smart Builder, they have a built-in action trigger for custom statements. So think any tool you've used and you did a click on this and it shows something or hides something, it does that same type of thing for xAPI statements for those tools. Almost all the other tools do have, not all of them, but most of them do have an execute JavaScript. So again, that's your kind of alternative to do something the tool doesn't support. And so that's where you can tie in. And again, there's lots of different resources and tools. We're going to talk about some of them today and share those out and provide that information. Some also have, and this is where it gets really cool, and I think this is kind of still on the frontier, but we're starting to see some things, is with xAPI, it's not all just about sending data. You can actually gather data from the LRS that's stored and then have it brought back into the learning experience to drive and change things. So Domino did one item where they can have content automatically adapt based on completing other content pieces previously in courses. So it reaches out to the LRS, brings it back in. Smart Builder actually has a nice activity block where you can bring those things in and through some of their internal programming do that. So that's pretty exciting and really expands beyond people just collecting data about what's going on. You can use your data to drive the solution. When you come to publishing your content, I talked about getting it into there. All of them will go ahead and have some form of putting the xAPI in there in some way to get the LRS endpoint. As I mentioned it, some of them have it out of the box. You just kind of configure it through a UI. When you go ahead and set that LRS endpoint and credentials, you can see that right there from the chart. Some of them don't have that. And usually what that means is that you need to add it in post-publish. They may have a wrapper that you can use post-publish, or you may have to simply crack open that zip and paste the contents in there. To be clear, there's most likely, if that's the case, there's somebody out there that's done that in the previous cohort. So there's a lot of great information to help you out there. But again, that's something you're going to need to think about. So those are really the core elements when you think about what you're going to get out of the box and bring that in. And like I said, your mileage is going to vary depending on the tool you use. It's also a great opportunity to try out new tools too and compare them. I wanted to give you an idea too from a data and expectations. I saw that some folks from Veracity are going to be having a talk a little bit later there. This is just some of the reports that they're adding in as out-of-the-box reports. This was taken with Domino and Veracity, just showing off all the different variations of question data and ways to look at it. Different LRSs are going to have different capabilities there. And the great thing is most LRSs have some way where you can create your own unique reports too. You may need to learn a little reporting language on it, but that's where you kind of get the results and pull that in. Another case, just to kind of keep you thinking there, is we built a Jeopardy game with Domino. And this was all using out-of-the-box capability in Domino. And so we wanted to go ahead and track not only did they get the scores, did they not get the scores, if they ran out of time because the timer expired, is that why they lost, or did they get the question wrong? How much money did they lose at each one? How much did they gain? What was their ongoing score in terms of that? So these are all items that were built and then using the custom xAPI statements and obviously sending variable data. And then we hooked it up to Watershed, and Watershed was able to quickly, actually overnight, because we had a presentation the next day, pop in some data and then create some different reports. So you could kind of see all those various different things, who was winning, who was gaining, why were they winning and losing, were questions too hard in certain categories. I mean, you could even start to pull in profile information. For myself, I was really good at the 80s music. The 2000s music, not as good at. The 90s, kind of in between there. But some really great information that you can kind of figure out. And again, a lot of this was, well, in this case, this was all out-of-the-box capabilities. We talked another example to kind of get your mind thinking about it was we wanted to use that adaptive case. So we built a email security course. And we configured it in with objectives. So if you take one course, then you pass certain objectives. And then what happened with those objectives, they were tagged in the course. It was set to be automatically adaptive. And when they took the second course, if it had the same objectives, they automatically skipped out of that content. So the course was automatically reduced. And in some cases, we even did a test. And if they failed the test, then we basically said, your skill is revoked, and they had to take a refresher there. And again, these were just some reports pulled out of Watershed, so you could kind of see at the objective level, how are people doing on that content? Did they actually know that objective? So again, another way to get at it beyond just simple question data. Wanted to leave you here with a few quick resources. As I mentioned, the cohort, a bunch of folks got together and put in some articles. Here's the links to those two articles, the original as well as the update that covered in there. I would go to both because you do get different information there that tells you what about out of the box and in more detail than I shared. And then down here, some great general resources that I found and that Domino put together of different resources out there. Feel free to pop into those. And that can really help you get started. And with that, I really want to kind of close it out and say thanks for your time and turn it back to Jess here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. I'm reviewing the questions right now that came through. There's maybe one from Pedro, and it's about the LMS and how it provides the API key, but no secret. Can he still use that process with that LMS?
Yeah, so if an LMS, I'm assuming in that case the LMS has an LRS in it. If it's conformant, they should be providing you the API key and the secret in there. If it's not conformant, they need to be making some changes so they can get you that. That being said, you might be able to just load it as a direct xAPI package into the system and go that route. Sometimes that is the case. So yeah, I'd kind of poke them a little bit on that. That being said, the other thing too, I didn't mention, a good thing to test out if you're kind of running into issues or things aren't there is you can load a package into one system and then send through the endpoint LRS statements off to a different LRS. You could also, for example, load it into the free SCORM cloud as a SCORM in some cases, or as an xAPI package. They'll get statements, but then you could be sending statements off to, say, Veracity or Watershed or to your own LMS's LRS, as long as they have the endpoint. These are all great ways to kind of diagnose and figure out problems.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm going to just make, and Devlin is going to be on next. So Devlin, if you want to start sharing your screen. Thank you for that, Paul. Folks, if you're asking questions, it will be easier and you'll likely get more participation from everyone in cohort if you ask the questions directly in the room chat, because some questions can be asked by folks who are participating, and I'll uplift and amplify the questions that are specific to our presenters. With that, I'll pass it over to you, Devlin.
Cool. Hi, Jess. Hi, everybody. Jess, thanks for hosting. I am happy to be here. And Paul, that was a good overview of all these different options. I mean, that was a great way to start the session off, I think, because yeah, there are many different ways to send xAPI statements. And I think Paul covered that pretty well. You can use that out of the box reporting and get the default like SCORM type xAPI data. You can use some of these. I mean, Domino is like really ahead of the curve with this custom send xAPI statement tool like built into the tool. So you can like actually send custom statements with that tool, which is really cool. And I got pretty excited too earlier this year because I see Storyline is like adding a feature like that as well. So I'm really interested to see what that implementation looks like. But what I will be talking to you all about today is how to send xAPI statements with that dreaded custom code. I mean, like Paul pointed out, if you're a developer, it's a piece of cake. But if you are completely new to JavaScript, it definitely has a bit of a learning curve. And some of you may have come across some of my content that helps you do this. But let's dive into it and actually do a quick little quiz that I've built that sends xAPI data. We can look at that data, and then we can look at how we're collecting it in Storyline. So I will share my screen here. Okay, so let me bring this over here to my other monitor in case there are any questions in the chat. But this quiz right here, I just pulled up. It's part of my like xAPI challenges app, which basically follows along with some tutorials that I can show you later if you're not already familiar with. But this was built with Articulate Storyline. It's meant to be like mobile friendly, so that's why we're here in this vertical format. Let's give ourselves an email address here. So we will say xAPI Cohort at test.com. Because we need to know who the actor is, right? If I was hosting this on a learning management system, either as a SCORM package or as an xAPI package, I could pull that user's name and email from the learning management system, so I wouldn't need to ask the learner for it. But in this case, this is accessible from the open web, so I need to get that user's email address so I can identify them in my xAPI statement. So we're just going to have the user enter it. This validates, so if I put in something that's not an email address, it like kicks it back and is like, you need to enter something valid. Because if this email address isn't valid, those xAPI statements are not going to ever arrive in our learning record store. So that's important. So we will submit that. Now, let's try to answer these questions together. I mean, I know some of you are very experienced with xAPI, but I think most of us are beginners or new to xAPI. So don't feel bad if you can't answer these, but since this is the first quiz in the app, may as well try. So which of the following is a valid JSON object? So I'll give us all, is it this first one here? You know, we can take a second. I don't think we're going to use the polling feature here, but just test yourself. The correct answer is the second one. A JSON object is made up of these key value pairs. So in this case, name is our key and Devlin is our value. And these pairs are separated by a colon. So you see these two have an equal sign. That's not how we make a JSON object. We need this nice colon. And then we surround the whole object in these curly brackets. So we will submit that answer choice. And if you're new to this, again, xAPI is JSON. So this is like the language of xAPI, so to speak. So correct, nice. All right, the most basic xAPI statement may contain which of the following elements? So I guess I should say the most basic xAPI statement has to contain which of the following elements? And I'm sure a lot of you probably already know this by now. So is it actor, object, and result, object, verb, and result, or actor, verb, and object? Yep, I'm seeing a lot of 3s in the chat. That is definitely correct. We need to know who is performing the action, what action are they performing, and what are they performing that action on. So actor, verb, and object. Good stuff. So which of the following is a valid value for the actor mbox property? So this is where we would store the actor's email address. So do we just include it just like this, like the plain email address? Do we add this mail to in front of it, or do we add this email in front of it? Option 2, right. Because again, these identifiers need to be IRIs. We're not going to dive into that, but this right here makes it like a valid link. So if you have a link on your website that looks like this and someone clicks it, it will open up an actual email client to send an email. So that's why we have this mail to colon in front of this email address. Good stuff, everyone. Correct. And which of the following is a valid value for the verb display property? So we have this funky stuff going on here with these letters in the front. We can see our verb right here, which is red. This is called a language map. So I'm seeing some 1s, 2s, and 3s, some 1s. Yeah, we're going to go with 1 here because a language map is a JSON object on its own. So we need these curly brackets. And then remember, it's every object is made up of these key value pairs. So language maps, their key is this language code. So this is telling us the language is English, particularly US, that's the region. And then the value here is red. So we can keep adding on different key value pairs here. Like we could add the Spanish version, the UK English version, which would be the same in this case. But yeah, that is right here. These are just distractors. This one, we need those curly brackets and these quotation marks because red is a string. And in JSON, we need our keys to have these double quotes around them. But we won't spend more time on that. I think we did well. Nice. And let's get to this last question here. Which of the following is true about a URI? And you may know this as an IRI. This is an internationalized resource identifier. They're very similar, only IRIs can take some additional international characters. So which of the following is true? And if for those of you who are less familiar, these are what your ID properties are. So your verb ID and your object ID. So I see a 2 here. Yeah, a lot of 2s. That is correct. So these IRIs do not need to resolve to real public-facing web pages. They just need to be unique identifiers, and they will look a lot like a URL. But the only different part is it doesn't have to actually go to a website. So let's see how we did here. All right. And sorry, it's going a little slow, I think, because of the network connection. But that's good. URIs are unique identifiers. And we got a 100%. So that's all fine and dandy. But let's say now we've delivered this to an audience, and we want to know how they're doing on this quiz. And this is the cool part about xAPI. So we can collect all of this data. What we're looking at now, this is Veracity LRS. This is a learning record store. This is where we hold all of that xAPI data. And I see at the end of March that Rob Chadwick is going to be giving a presentation. I hope that nobody misses that because he's taught me a lot about how to use this LRS, and he's just a genius developer overall. So Yeah, super cool. And this LRS is very developer friendly, so I think you'll like what I have to show you here. So we can see here we have this user who answered questions 1 through 5, and then they passed that quiz. So I included the responses here, so we can see actually what we responded to each one of these questions. So you'll recognize these as these answer choices, right? So cool stuff here. Let's actually expand this now. This might feel a little bit overwhelming if you're very new to xAPI, but this is the actual xAPI statement that gets sent every time we answer one of these questions. So I just used a random name because remember, we only asked the person for their email address. That's the part that's required and has to be unique to that user. The name wasn't important in this case. I just need this unique identifier. So here we are, xAPI cohort at test.com. That is us. Here's our verb ID and display. We answered a question, and we can see that question here in the object. Here's the URI or IRI we discussed. It's this unique identifier associated with question 1. And yeah, it's a question in this write an xAPI statement quiz. And here's the cool part. Here's one of these optional objects, the result object, and we can see how long we spent on that question. So we can see right here, we spent 52 seconds answering that first question. And this is really cool, especially when you look at this data in aggregate and you can say, okay, it looks like on question 3, people are spending 5 minutes. What's taking so long on this question right here? We need to dig deeper and take a closer look at this. We can also include the response. And again, this looks like it's an object, but the response needs to be a string. And this was the actual response, if you remember which one of these is a valid JSON object. And this is cool here too. You can actually see what the user's score is at any moment in time. So the minimum score is 0, the maximum score is 5, and the raw score at this point in time is 1 because they've only answered one question so far. So that, and we have some more data in here too, but I don't want to overwhelm us. But this is just some of the stuff you can collect with xAPI and with custom code specifically. So we have the same situation going on here for all of these. And then we can see that the user passed this write an xAPI statement quiz with this past verb. Here's the ID for the quiz itself. And we can see now we answered 5 out of 5. Our scaled score is a 1, which is equivalent to 100%. So success is true. And then we can also see the duration for the quiz overall. So it took us 4 minutes and 15 seconds to go through that. It might look a little wonky. Again, these are some of the more technical quirks of xAPI. And we're not gonna dive into those here. I have some tutorials to help you with this. Again, I think a lot of you have probably seen this, but this is the guide to xAPI in Storyline. And it starts very basic. Here's how to write an xAPI statement. And it gets more and more complex, like measuring duration, collecting the quiz score information, open text responses. So this is all free. And then again, these little challenges, like what we saw here, there's an app associated with this to quiz yourself as you go. So let's look back over here. So we have this, this data, it's all good and well in a single xAPI statement, but let's look at some of the visualizations that we can create now. Sorry, I think this got a little wonky because I changed my screen resolution to make it easier to see. This does not normally look like this, so I'm very sorry about this. Sorry, let's see if we can... Yeah, it's not playing nicely. Again, this is because I changed my resolution for this screen sharing session to make it easier to see. But usually it's a nice visualization, and we can see what the average score is by each one of the quizzes I have here. So like this one, for example, collect a text response quiz, the average score is only 78%, whereas something like this, the average score is 86%, 91% on that quiz we just took. So when you're looking at this data, you can say, okay, people are clearly struggling with some of these, like just send an xAPI statement quiz. The average score is 85%, so let's drill in a little bit deeper. So I can select this option right here for the select an xAPI statement quiz dashboard that I built. And we can see question by question how people are responding to these questions. So you see these nice pie charts. 95% of people right here are getting this first question correct for this quiz. We can see here we have some good distractors, like only less than 75% of people are answering this question 2 correctly. And again, I'm sorry this is so crowded. I just tried to, oh wait, let's see. Oh, nice suggestion, Brian. Nice. So yeah, this gives us a bit more real estate because we took that away. But I love using xAPI for this use case because we can see question by question, how are people responding, are some of these questions too difficult? Is my content not helping with this question enough? It gives you some really good insights into how your content is helping people and where people are struggling with that content. So I see we have not a ton of time, or am I already at time? Sorry, Jess, let me know how we're doing with time, if I have a few more minutes or not. I think you're muted, Jess. That's okay. We'll keep going. Just feel free to cut me off. I don't want to cut into anyone else's time. I can't remember if we have 5 minutes or if we're out. But I just want to show you this in Storyline really quickly. So the difficult part to make all of this work is, yes, you do need to have you need to build a function. So you see right here, we create this send answered function with JavaScript. Again, if you're new to this, I'm sure this all looks super confusing because it's just code. This might look a little bit more familiar. This is where we're actually building that xAPI statement. But once you've gone through these tutorials and built this function that you need, actually executing that function from Storyline becomes quite easy. So let's move down here to our submit button. And we have this execute JavaScript trigger, and Paul was hinting at this. If we look at that trigger, we're using this send answered function, and we're just passing in the information we want to include in this xAPI statement. So we're telling it, this is question 1, here's the ID for question 1, and we're going to use the data from this Q1 response variable. And again, if you're newer to Storyline, every time someone selects one of these options, it sets this Q1 response variable equal to the value of this answer choice. So that's how this is kind of working behind the scenes. And the cool part about doing this with custom code is you don't have to upload this as an xAPI package. You can publish this to a website. You can publish this as a SCORM package. And you can build out those xAPI statements really in depth, which is what this latest article I just published like last week and haven't even shared. I mean, this is like a monster article I just published about how to get like all of the data you can possibly get out of an xAPI statement. And it also dives in at the end about how to actually send these xAPI statements without any sort of like third-party wrappers. So just using pure JavaScript, how can we send these statements without a wrapper, without modifying the published output folder? So it's pretty cool stuff. I think I probably ran out of time here, but we can talk about xAPI if you want to connect offline.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Devlin. There was Veracity, so he was using Veracity. Is there a tutorial of xAPI on how to do in Storyline on your site?
Yep. Yeah, I can actually even like share that link if we want. This links out to all the Storyline tutorials, and yeah, cool.
Awesome. So we're gonna get Leanne teed up. Thank you for that presentation, Devlin. And Leanne, it's on you.
All right. Wouldn't be going live without some technical difficulties, right? So I'm just going to get my screen share started. And we should be seeing a PowerPoint if I can just get some quick confirmations in the chat.
Yes, we can see you. Great.
Awesome.
Leanne.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I am Leanne G. I am the Learning Experience Development Team Lead at Torrance Learning. And I just want to start off really quick by saying thanks to everyone for joining us today. I'm super excited to be following some really great share outs by Paul and Devlin. I know we're time is always of the essence, so I'll just get right into things. What I want to do today is highlight how xAPI proved valuable for one of our clients, and then not only talk about, but show how we are able to send rich data from the Storyline course we developed using a tool called xAPI. And So full disclosure, I know it was mentioned a little bit at the beginning. xAPI is a tool. It's actually a Torrance learning product, which I just feel like is important to touch on given that Cohort is a vendor neutral space. And we're just trying to present like a couple different ways that folks can kind of get into the xAPI space. So I'm speaking today less as a Torrance learning team member and more as a learning experience developer who really doesn't have a significant amount of programming experience. So, you know, as Devlin mentioned, sometimes, you know, we hear the term JavaScript and it can seem a little bit scary. But what xAPI does is it generates the code that me and other folks on my team need to add to our storyline projects without having to turn to our learning engineering team or learn how to write it ourselves. So I'll do a walkthrough in just a little bit, but first I want to dive into a little bit of a case study to kind of talk about the why. So this is an example of an interaction from an e-learning course that we made for one of our clients. And I just want to talk about SCORM for a quick second. So with SCORM, we're only able to extract the most basic data from a course. So did they complete it? How long did it take? How did they score on a quiz? Things of that nature. But if we think about a screen like this, you know, what would be useful? So this screen is asking why coach? And for context, this client was rolling out a new approach to sales coaching. And the goal of this course was to get sales managers to talk differently, or to think differently, I'm sorry, about their coaching work. So we present them with this screen at the beginning of the course, and they select the reasons that that resonate with them as indicated by the yellow rectangles, and then they move on. Where it gets interesting, though, is when we bring this interaction back. So we bring it back at the end of the course. The learner's original selections are still there, but they have an opportunity to keep, discard, or select other reasons based on any mindset shifts that have occurred over the course of their learning journey. So we know that if this was a course that was published for SCORM, we wouldn't really get any of the insight into what the learner selected, what they kept, what they discarded. But with xAPI, we actually can get that information, and we can see those choices and changes visualized in our LRS. So in this particular case, we're using a watershed LRS. Let's take a look at another screen. So this interaction is your standard click to reveal. Learner clicks on a step, is presented with additional information in the text below. But you know, wouldn't it be nice if we had information on whether the learner clicked on all of the steps? What order did they click on? Did they revisit any of them? Again, if this is published for SCORM, those answers remain a mystery. But with xAPI, we can find out things like how long the learner spent on each step, what percentage of them clicked on you know, all of the steps versus maybe 2 or 3, how many folks clicked on the See Example button in the right corner there. It's kind of unassuming. It may have been missed. So if we get some data about that, that can help us reevaluate its placement on screen, or it can at least inform, it can get us the data that we need to inform decisions like that. So let's look at one more example. This is a free response screen where people have an opportunity to write how they'd coach Mike, who is a hypothetical person on their sales team. They enter their response and then they compare it to an ideal. Actually, looking at the screenshot now, I'm not sure I picked the most representative screenshot of the interaction, but if we just think about it at a high level for a second, we wouldn't have the insight into what folks are writing with Score and Publish. But with xAPI, we can capture their input, find out whether people are submitting meaningful responses or whether they're just submitting throwaway responses. You can see whether people are getting it or whether folks are struggling to connect with concepts. Again, just more insight into how people are interacting and learning from the course. So we talked about the basic data that we get from a Score and Publish, and I know Paul mentioned this earlier in his share out, which, out of the box, you tend to get basically the data that you would get from Score, but in xAPI language. So the screenshot that you see on screen here is showing that, was the course launched? Did the learner pass or fail? Did they complete it? All sorts of SCORmy things. You can see that the statements on screen really only highlight experienced as a verb, which is telling us if a learner viewed the screen. But with a tool like xAPI or with custom JavaScript, like Devlin mentioned, you can see that we get much more insight into what's going on in a course. So in that second highlighted section on screen, we are getting information about the example that I showed you where the learner is selecting the answers about the value of coaching. So I'm going a little fast and furious here, but I want to make sure that I have an opportunity to kind of do a live demo here. So I am going to switch out of my PowerPoint, switch over to course. Okay, so I have a sample course here. And I'm just gonna launch it. Of course, the way I have my screen set up, it's hard to find the reset button. So super basic, we just have begin button, have an interaction here that I can click through, and actually, could probably maximize this here instead of showing you all the other parts of my screen. So I'm just gonna enter a company name here. I didn't not think this through well with being able to see everything, but do the slider here, select an answer. We wouldn't typically have all of these elements on screen, but just so that we can kind of give the example of data, gonna move on, and then we're finished. So I'll exit the demo, return to the LMS, and then over here we can see the statements that we just passed from that course. So we have experienced here, which is, the statements that you would get out of the box from Storyline. But since we have xAPI code in there as well, we're also able to get richer data. So we have the statement here where we answered the question company name, and we can see that we answered Torrance Learning. So now I just want to switch over to xAPI. So this is the xAPI interface. Right now we have an example project that's created. We can think of a project, at least in the case of this demo, as an e-learning course. So we have different statements or different activities, and then the different activities can have verbs here. We've included some that have that are kind of similar for what you would get out of the box from Storyline, but you can kind of set up based on what your project needs. I've created a, that's always fun. Okay, I created a demo project here for today's presentation. Okay, let me try to refresh this. Sorry, everybody. It's one of the hazards of doing things live. So I'm actually going to delete this from earlier. Maybe. I'm just going to roll with it. So we have our demo course here for our demonstration. I'm going to add a new activity. I'm just going to, I'm going to create a new button in Storyline in just a second. So I'll call this a button and go ahead and I'll create that. Oh, hold on. Sorry. Okay, yep, I'll create that. And then I'm going to add a new statement. So at a minimum, an xAPI statement is actor, verb, object. So we have the actor, which is going to get passed when you load your course in the LMS. And then we have our activity that we just created. So it's the button. Now we have to add a verb. So when I click on the box here, I'm presented with this list, and this is a list that is from the official ADL list of verbs. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the verb interacted for the purpose of today's demo. Interacted with a button isn't exactly the most groundbreaking use case for xAPI, but if we think back to the examples that I talked about a little bit earlier, interacted. We can get data about interactions with different parts of the click to reveal screens and things like that. So now we have your basic statement. We have our actor, which will get passed. We have our verb interacted, and then we have the object, which is the button. And what I want to point out here is the output on the side. So this was being created as I was updating the verb. So if I just go and select a different verb for a second, you can see that it changed over here on the right in the output. So I do want to go back and I want to stick with interacted. But this is essentially the code that we're going to want to put into an execute JavaScript trigger in Storyline. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy that. And then I am going to move into Storyline. If I can find my mouse. Oh, where is that? There it is. Hazards of multiple monitors. So this is the Storyline file for the demo that I showed. You can see the interactions here. I'm going to go ahead and I am going to insert a new button. And this is our new button. And then I'm going to add a new execute JavaScript trigger. So go to action, scroll down to execute JavaScript, and then I'll click here, which opens up the box here where we will paste the code. And I'm actually not sure that I grabbed the code, so hold on for a second. Copy that, and then go back to my project. And then I'm going to go ahead and paste. And so here's the code that I just copied. You can see that it comes in with some comments. You can take those or leave those as you see fit. One of the benefits to the comments, though, is that it does give a little bit of context for what your project was, what the object was, since you can't necessarily tell right off the bat from the trigger in Storyline itself. But there's the basic JavaScript code from xAPI. So we can go ahead and just add that there. And then the other part that we're going to want to add is actually the configuration for the LRS. So if we go back to xAPI, oh, okay. Hold, please. Re-enter the builder here. There's a publishing tab, and this has information that you're going to want to put on the master slide of your storyline project. There are a couple of different options here depending on what your needs are and how your systems are set up. But in this case, this setup is for if your LMS has an included learning record store. So the code that's down here, again, it's something that you can just easily copy and paste, and then you would add that to the master slide of your storyline project. So I believe, since this demo is already pre-baked, that it's already on the master. Yeah, so here we have an execute JavaScript trigger, and it has the configuration code that's needed. So I'm conscious of time, and I know this was a whirlwind, but xAPI is one of the tools that we make available for Cohort if that's something that you want to try out. So certainly, if you have other questions, we can be available as needed. So with that, I will transition back to Jess.
Leanne, and thanks, Paul, and thanks, Devlin, for those presentations. They were very helpful, informative, and I hope everyone is now ready to go and try. So we're about 4 minutes out before the top of the hour, and there's just one big thing I want to make sure we touch on. We are using Kaltura Media Space right now. You are in our live room. Everyone who is registered for Cohort should have gotten an email with the login information. If you have not gotten your login information from email, stay tuned. We populate those every week. So once you have access to Kaltura Media Space, you'll be able to use it, upload videos, and also collect data in Watershed. So the other thing I want to touch on is, after next week, so in week 4, we will officially start covering weekly updates on the teams. The way that we cover weekly updates in Cohort is by using GitHub. So if you go to our xAPIcohort.com and you look at our teams tab, you'll see what teams. Each team will have a tab that is going to be easy for us to access your updates. If you need support in getting a GitHub set up for your team, please send me or Matt Cleaver a Slack, but we really have it set up pretty easy. You can hover over a message on the 3 dots and hit join Cohort GitHub, and then you can fill out the form with the team of your choice to get it set up and get it started. If you need support on getting your team GitHub set up, please reach out. We want to make sure when we're reporting out on our team updates, everybody's website is ready to go. All right. So as of right now, we have teams that are forming. You can find teams in our Slack, and you can add them by adding the channels, and look for any team that has the team notation in the front, and you can just join those teams to see what's going on. There are lots of good conversations happening, lots of startups happening, and you can join these teams or you can create your own. The things that you need to think about if you're creating your own is every team needs to have a team name, and it starts with the notation of team and a brief description of what you're doing. It should have a Slack channel. The Slack channel follows this notation. Everyone should have a GitHub page. You can also have a repository. The repository is optional, but the page we do want you to have so that we can report updates. And a project brief. The project brief is the question or idea that you want to explore and the use case to provide context. So this is allowing us to think about what these teams are doing. You all should be thinking about when and how you're going to be meeting. And then how are you sending those statements and how are you storing those statements? What's your learning record store? And then the weekly updates, once we start doing that in week 4, we're going to need a representative from each team to give that out each week. If you have questions on any of this process, please Slack me. So if you could be in 2 categories. Right now you have an idea, right? So set up that Slack channel, post a description, and invite people in Maine to come on over. If you have no idea, start joining all the Slack teams. You can be a part of all of them. That doesn't sign you up for work. Join in so you can contribute ideas, attend meetings, or do some work. Or you could just lurk, right? You could just observe and see what's happening. We're right at the top of the hour, so some good stuff to know. We'll be right back here next week to learn how to send data from something that's not e-learning with Matt Cleaver. You can sign up for the xAPI party now. It is online and will likely always be virtual. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email our help desk or message me in Slack. With that, have an awesome, awesome Thursday. Happy Black History Month, and get out there and make something.